Well, part of what your curiosity took you into, and this was at a relatively early age, was psychedelics. And this can tie into the whole mental health conversation, especially today, where we're starting to see the legalization of these substances for treatment of different mental health issues, and people are openly talking about them again. And the box has been opened, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. So again, this is
Well,
something you've had longevity in, and something you're still a proponent of. Let's talk about, in the case of mental health, how these substances hopefully are going to, crack open and shift the whole paradigm.
I think there's tremendous potential there. I first took mescaline in, let me see, 1961. So a very long time ago. And I, I think always saw the potential for these to have very beneficial effects on individual health, on societal health. It's taken a long time for this change to come about, but as you say, I think this is really going mainstream, and there's no way of putting the genie back in the bottle. A few months ago, Vogue magazine had a cover story on psilocybin. Town and Country magazine recently, of all things, Town and Country, had an article titled "Why is everybody smoking toad venom?" I mean, unbelievable. On TV series, people are microdosing. This is going mainstream. And also, I'll tell you that before the pandemic, when I was traveling a lot and speaking, no matter what topic I was talking about, whether it was healthy aging, integrative medicine, nutrition, the questions I got were about psychedelics. How can we find a guide? How can we get them? So the interest is tremendous. And I think the potential, well, I have to say this is a kind of little out there, but maybe this is the one thing that can turn our society around, because we are not in very good shape on a lot of fronts. And I think only a change in consciousness can really make things, move things in the right direction. And psychedelics have the potential to do that.
I could see this being a really challenging time for somebody who is learning of the potential of these different plant medicines. And because we're in that transition zone right now where things aren't fully legalized and it's still underground, it's like, how do you go about finding reliable sources to, find these quote unquote drugs and to do them in a healthy way and integrate it in a healthy way? So I could see how there would be a lot of frustration there for people that really need these sooner than later.
So I think a big need is for guides who can help people structure these experiences in a way that make them most profitable. So there are several institutions that are training people to do this. Our center at the University of Arizona is developing a curriculum in psychedelic therapy for the people that we train. So I think it's happening. But right now, it's very confused. The legal situation is not clear. We'll have to see how all this plays out. I don't know, but I think at root, it's a good thing.
Let's talk about your connection between traveling and psychedelics, because a big part of your story, and we've talked about this on previous shows, is how you've traveled around. You've done a lot of writing and work with different groups around the world. In your travels, in your work you've done, talk about some of the experiences you've had with psychedelics. And I'm curious, is this something that you see basically across the globe, or is it something that you're just seeing in these small isolated pockets? Because you have a really interesting perspective as somebody who is so well traveled.
Well, it's not across the globe, but it's over large parts of it, especially in the New World. The native peoples in North and South America were the most given to discovering and using psychedelic plants. In the Old World, in Africa, there are not very many of these things and not as much use. And there were other methods that were found to alter consciousness, like drumming and chanting and group dancing and so forth. But the use of psychedelic plants in native populations in the New World, very widespread. I visited a number of shamans who used mushrooms, who used ayahuasca, and watched what they did. Some of them worked as, I think, very skillful psychotherapists. They really knew how to structure a session in a way that produced a very positive outcome for people who came to them. So I saw some of the positive uses of these things, and it's just wonderful now that this is happening up here. I also think I'm a little disappointed that all the focus has been on emotional health. It's for depression and obsessive compulsive disorder and PTSD. I think there's a huge potential here in physical medicine as well. I think they have a tremendous possibility of helping people get out of chronic pain, of autoimmune conditions, of a whole range of things in which the mind body connection is very important.
Talk more about that because you are the only person I've heard emphasize this aspect. Is it the fact that it's altering consciousness and the way people think about the physical condition that they're experiencing? So does it basically what I'm getting at, is it through the mind that it's impacting the body, or is it a direct response of the plant medicine on the body itself?
Maybe it's both, but I think that the effect on the mind is probably the more important. Even if you look at how opioids deal with pain, they don't block the perception of pain. If you talk to somebody who you haven't given them so much that their mind is fuzzy and ask them what they're experiencing, people often say, well, the pain is still there, but it doesn't bother me. Or it's as if it's happening to someone else. So clearly that's working on what's called the secondary perception of pain, not the primary reception of it. So I think that applies to a lot of things, that things are happening in the body, but there's latitude as to how they're interpreted in the mind. And that I think psychedelics can give you a glimpse of the possibility of perceiving what's going on in your body in a different way. And once you see that that's possible, then you can figure out ways of making that happen more of the time.
And what are your thoughts about using physical modalities, whether it be, you talked about chanting, I think, and drumming, which got me thinking about, say, something like dance and using your physical body as a tool to impact the mind. So basically, yeah, unlocking different aspects of the mind by moving the physical body in certain patterns and rhythms through, say, dance.
I think that's been used throughout history in many different cultures, whether it's dance, group dancing, chanting. I mean, many ways of doing this in different cultures. But I think lots of people have experimented that, and I think it's very real. I'll tell you one story. I was once at the Field Museum in Chicago, and I worked with the botanical staff there, and there was a night for donors to come where they put on a show. And one of them, they had a huge gamelan ensemble, the percussion instruments used in Bali. I don't know how many different instruments, there were a lot. And they had a group that played gamelan. So all these people were standing around in the big hall. And one of the pieces that they played was a war chant that was supposed to ready people for battle. When this got going, I mean, I felt adrenaline surges in my body. I was ready to go out and break something. It was an amazing effect of sound on my mind body connection.
One interesting aspect of psychedelics is pulling back the veil and seeing more to the physical world than we are seeing day to day with our naked eye. And I know you're big into this, talking about being more to this life experience we're having than what we're seeing with our five senses. So I'd love for you to talk more about that and how that's been impacted through different psychedelic experiences you've had.
Over the years, many people who've used psychedelics have said that they've had these spiritual revelations and mystical experiences. They've come to view the world in a different way. And a lot of religious leaders have made fun of that, saying that these are artificial experiences. They're not, real spiritual experiences. I always felt really doesn't matter whether they're real or not. If they affect you and make you change your life, they're important. And now there is good research going on at Johns Hopkins University. A man named Roland Griffiths there is one of the main psychedelic researchers, and they have documented in their sessions these spiritual insights and the ways that people view themselves and the world after a psychedelic experience. This is part of why I say I think there is a potential of these things to turn consciousness around. One of the experiences that I've had on psychedelics is just a real sense that my consciousness is continuous with everything. That obviously my dogs are conscious, but I perceive plants to be conscious. I even perceive rocks and mountains to be conscious. There's some some basic energy that's in me, that's in everything. And that way of seeing the world is very different from the way that conventional science would have to see it. And these experiments at Johns Hopkins are documenting that many people who take psychedelics come around to seeing things in this other way. If you see yourself as being connected to the environment in a very real way, then I think you're much more motivated to protect the environment. That's why I say I think the potential here is very great.
One thing I think of from time to time is how, as a human being, it would be so ignorant of us to assume that our five senses and the spectrum of those senses
Right.
is everything that there is. I mean,
Well,
like,
obviously it isn't. I mean, we perceive such a narrow slice of reality.
that's what I'm getting at.
Bats hear a lot more than we do. Dogs smell a lot more than me. There's so much more out there.
Again, it would be ignorant for us to assume that just what we have is the maximum capacity and that we're taking in the full experience that's happening.
I couldn't agree more. And I think also that, when I look back on recent insights, when I was in school, when I was in college, the prevailing belief in science was that there were no other planets. That the solar system was unique, that there were no stars that had planets around them. That was the dogma. And suddenly they're everywhere, and what a change. And even the idea, it's only been since the 1920s that people realized that these fuzzy patches of light out there were other galaxies. That wasn't just all the Milky Way. So our view is constantly expanding. And I think it's got a lot of room to expand further.
One interesting aspect of this boom of psychedelics is the fact that a lot of them now are coming to North America, and we can do them in, cities and in these environments that aren't native to the plant medicine. So again, as somebody who's traveled, what are your thoughts on taking these medicines out of their natural environment, the natural ceremony and experience? How big of a piece is that? And can we bring them back into the big cities and still get the same benefits?
My guess is we can, but those are complicated questions, including one aspect of it is the whole idea of cultural appropriation. Are we taking things from indigenous societies and not compensating them for taking them? I mean, that's one question. What about people trying to patent these things, which exist in nature? I don't know the answer to that. My guess is that we can recreate the good aspects of these experiences in other settings. And there are ways of doing that here. Although, I wonder when a lot of the people doing psychedelic therapy, you're indoors lying on a couch with headphones, maybe it would be better to be doing this outdoors in a natural setting.
Can you share a specific story of when you were in a certain area where this plant medicine was located and you had a really authentic experience that included the environment, included a shaman, and how impactful that was on you going forward?
The first time that I took mushrooms, I was in southern Mexico, in Oaxaca, in one of these indigenous villages where the mushroom cults had originated, and I had met a shaman, a woman who gave a mushroom ceremony for me one night. At the time that I was there, this was in 1972, I think, the area had been sealed off because hippies had been coming in here and the army sealed it off. Anyway, I got through. And so I was a lone gringo in this area where people didn't even speak Spanish. It was just the indigenous language. But there was a formal mushroom ceremony that started at night, and this was a night of a full moon. And these villages are on mountain peaks, connected at that time by very little narrow roads. And so I sat with this woman. She prayed with me. We talked. It was great. And then after a certain amount of time, she said, "You should go out and learn from the moon." So she went to bed. The family was in bed. I went out on the patio, and it was a very bright full moon. And I sat there for a while, and there was a total eclipse of the moon, which I did not know about. I didn't know it was going to happen. And watching this thing progress, to totality, I mean, it was blown away. And the next morning, I went in, and her mother was an elderly woman. I said there was an eclipse of the moon last night, and this woman went, that was a bad thing for them. This was an ill omen. And to me, it was totally the wonder and magic of the universe seeing this, and especially that it was so unexpected. It was just amazing. So I stayed high on that for a long, long time.
As somebody who has had all these different experiences with travel, seeing different parts of the world and experiencing these plant medicines, both those aspects to me seem like they'd be really transformative to consciousness and to the way you see and interact with the world. And you're somebody who, again, has had such longevity in your career and you live such an interesting life. And almost 80 years old, you're continuing to share your message. How impactful is what I'm getting at here? Do you feel those two experiences specifically have been to expanding your mind and making you the interesting guy that you are?
I think they've been very formative and also have shaped my philosophy of medicine and health. A lot of what I've written about, I really am aware of the magical nature of the universe and reality, and that is a source of great pleasure for me.
What does it feel like as somebody who was dipping their toe, not even dipping their toe? I'm not sure how far into the psychedelics you got, but somebody who's experimented and at that time they were, or at least through part of that journey, because the way I see it, they were more accepted back in the day, and maybe you can talk more to this. And then, psychedelics were basically banned and nobody talked about them for a period of time. So I'd like for you to start talking about that, the evolution of psychedelics and the way that people basically shun them for a period of time. And secondarily, what I was originally getting at is how does that feel as somebody who was into them when they were taboo and now seeing them come around and people in a general sense have this acceptance and this reverence for their potential?
Well, it's very gratifying. And I think when I first got into them, there was not yet the repression. There was a period of enthusiasm for them, and there was early research looking at their potential for helping terminal cancer patients become comfortable with with their approaching death and not have as much pain and not need as many opioids. There was very fascinating work done with prisoners. I mean, demonstrating the positive potential. Then it all got clamped down on, and there was this long period of repression. And one of the worst aspects of that was that research was blocked on them. So, nobody could get these substances to study them or look for any of these positive effects. So the change that's happened now, all I can say is it's long in coming, overdue, and it's very gratifying to me to see this happen. And I really have this feeling that this could be the one thing out there that might turn it all around.
Talk about what that catalyst for change was. They were, on lockdown. You mentioned the research. We couldn't even do research. What popped the lid off and then brought these back to the forefront? And at what year was this? Was this in the 90s or early
No,
2000s?
it's more recent than that. It's in the 2000s. I don't know. I don't know what year. I can't give a year for it. Maybe it's that there's some critical mass in society of people now who have had experience of these things. Maybe it's the baby boomers, who had a lot of experience with this, now reaching an age where they're influential in society. Um, Possibly. I don't know all the reasons for it, but something has changed, and it's a very good thing.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
I often recommend a simple breathing technique, the 4-7-8 breath. You can Google my name and find YouTube demonstrations of it. That's the most effective anti-anxiety measure I've ever discovered, and doesn't cost anything.